think I started out with that. I ended up with that. I think you just start out trying to think, okay, how am I going to make this work? I want the job, but I'm not in a position to move. And so how am I going to make it work? And it worked. Like I said, and a lot of things are easier to explain in hindsight than they are looking forward.
Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. After 15 years of working for 3 major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs, I discovered the one thing I loved the most was helping women in sports shatter glass ceilings and take their seat at the table. I loved it so much that I made a business out of it. I have the honor of coaching high-performing women in the sports and entertainment industry and supporting them as they go after exactly what they want in their career. So if you are feeling tired of waiting on the sidelines, done being overlooked for promotions, and you're ready to pull ahead of the pack and take your career to the next level, girl, I'm here for it. I also created the Game of Her Own podcast to support you as well. We are here to share the stories of incredible women who work in sports and entertainment. These leaders and trailblazers will inspire you with their success and the lessons they've learned along the way to the top. Ladies, there is nothing like women empowering women. I am so honored you're here. Imagine leading a project that ends up setting a new standard for your entire industry. My next guest did just that. Janet Marie Smith, Senior Vice President of Planning and Development for the Los Angeles Dodgers, is known for her legendary work all over the country. This includes the work she did on Camden Yards for the Baltimore Orioles. After its opening in 1992, the work Janet Marie did set the standard for a new wave of ballparks. Listen in as Janet Marie tells you about her work not only with the Dodgers and Orioles, but the Boston Red Sox, Atlanta Braves, and her work outside of baseball. You don't want to miss it when she drops gems like why she ignored a rejection letter from the Baltimore Orioles, why collaboration is so critical, how she pulled off working for multiple teams, and how Janet Marie managed to remain living in Baltimore no matter where her career took her. All right, friends, let's do this. Janet Marie, I am so excited that you're here. Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to see you.
I know, likewise. Okay, so before we get started, I'm hoping you can take us back in time and tell us all when you first fell in love with sports.
I have some very distinctive sort of minor points. It was not, a grand thing, but I always enjoyed the weekends just as a little girl because my dad would always have baseball or football or something on the radio. And I just can remember that sort of background noise just always being so soothing. It was just something, it was the excitement that was soothing, if you will. There was this camaraderie and this feeling of being a part of a bigger audience. And I really enjoyed that sensation almost more than the sport itself, but just that feeling of great stories of hard work and success and the crowd kind of all having your back. And then when I got to college and was studying architecture at Mississippi State, our studios were out on the edge of campus right next to, guess what, the athletic field. So we'd slip over to Duty Noble Stadium and watch a little baseball, or big crowd, there'd be a football game. And it was just, there was something about that atmosphere that's really stuck with me. And when I first began working in sports, it wasn't really the sport itself that brought me to the idea of applying to work for the Orioles on Camden Yards, but the fact that it was in a city and it was part of the rebirth of a downtown. And as an architect and planner, I really, that was like right there where I wanted to be. And it seemed to me that sports were a great vehicle for that. And that's still the way it seems to me today, all these years later.
So did you have a sport? Was it always baseball for you? I know your work has primarily been in baseball. So was it always in baseball that you fell in love with?
Well, it is. I do love baseball more than other sports. I love the pace of it. I love the outdoors. I love the summer fun that it represents. But I also love it because it is a long season, and in terms of populating a downtown and contributing to urban life, I think baseball does a better job of that than anything else, just because there's so much activity in the building. And I love the fact that, unlike other sports, there's no set field dimension. It can be what it wants to be, and it's a reflection of the city it's in. The ballpark is a reflection of the city it's in. And I love that about baseball too, that it takes on the character of its city.
So you're talking about like urban life and sports and bringing that together. How did that become something that you were interested in?
Of course, it's easier to see in hindsight. I loved working on projects. I was fortunate that right after architecture school, I was able to work in New York on Battery Park City, which is a mixed-use development of residential, retail, office, public parks, a waterfront esplanade. And I love the idea of just building a city. It's just what I wanted to do. And I've always looked for projects that gave me that opportunity. And when I learned that in 1988, that the Orioles were going to leave Memorial Stadium and move to downtown Baltimore, at first I thought, well, that's kind of too bad. Memorial Stadium's this great old shoe ballpark. And I was kind of disappointed to see them leave. And then I got to thinking about it, that what better way to energize and add new growth to an urban center than to bring 3 million people a year into its downtown. And so I got really excited just thinking of it like that. It was one of the first times since the early 20s, in 2 generations, that a team had gone into a city and looked to be a part of that urban development. And I was really excited about being a part of that. And fortunately, Larry Lucchino, who was president of the club, that was his baby. He was advocating an old-fashioned ballpark with modern amenities and being part of a city. And they had hired HOK Sport to do the design, and they were just had an outstanding track record in sports venues. But Larry was eager to make certain that the whole urbanity of the sport was represented in its architecture. And so my role was to champion that during the course of design, and just been a flag I've enjoyed carrying ever since.
It's a great opportunity. Talk more about how that opportunity came to be. So I know you posted on Instagram your no thank you letter to the Orioles announcement. Will you share with everybody more about that?
Yeah, I will. So I wrote a letter to the Orioles and said they did not post a position. I just wrote a letter and said, this is a project I'd love to work on. Here are the things I've done. I think I could contribute to it. And my first response was a letter that said, thank you for your interest. Thanks for your resume. Keep rooting for the Orioles. We don't have any positions open. It felt like the kind of letter that might go out automatically. And so I just did not let that deter me at all. I kept calling Larry's office until I got myself an interview. And once he agreed to see me, we found that there was a lot to talk about. And I really appreciate the way he conducted the interview too. It wasn't just a traditional interview with us sitting across the desk from each other, but he had the preliminary drawings and master plan in his conference room. And so after we talked for 45 minutes or so, he said, well, do you have time to take a look? I'd love to have you just go and spend some time with those materials and then tell me what you think. So it's like a dry run, it's like a test. What did I think and how would I respond to it? And I really relished that. And that was just, it was a smart move on his part. And it gave me a chance to show him what I could do and how I could interpret what was there and perhaps lead it toward the direction that he was hoping to take it. If I had to distill all of that down to, what was it? It was sort of just targeting something I wanted to do and staying with it rather than letting the seemingly rejection get in my way.
So you got a no thank you. And you were like, nope, I don't accept this letter.
No, I thought they sent that by mistake. They don't know me yet. So I really don't think it bothered me at all. I think I was just like, no, that was a mistake. I'll let them know.
I love that. Nope, that was a mistake. So I'll let them know this came out by mistake. So you just decided, okay, I'm going to keep calling Larry Lucchino and until
did.
he agrees to see me. I mean, what do those, like, if someone else is thinking that, I've had women come to me and say, I'm been inspired, because I've had a similar thing where, a position didn't exist and I worked on creating it. And people are like, I'm inspired by that. What did you do? So I want to ask you the same thing, because I remember hearing this story when I was at the Red Sox, when we were both at the Red Sox. I was like, that's an amazing story. Like, I loved it and it stuck with me forever. What were you thinking, or what were you saying when you were calling Larry and trying to get him to meet with you?
Well, I felt like from what little I had read that I could bring something to that project that wasn't there, fit with their goals, but that I could execute it in a way that I just felt confident that I could bring something to it that was a little different. They had lots of talent at the table, but I had worked in a different industry and had worked on urban development and had worked on making projects unique to their city. And I felt it was something that he wanted out of this ballpark, and maybe was using slightly different words with it, but I felt it was what he wanted. And I felt like I could interpret that and take his vision. And that's not a word I use lightly, but I felt like I could take his vision and work with the design team and help make that real, and work with his staff at the Orioles and help distill from their aspirations for the ballpark what needed to be physically in the ballpark to make that work. And I felt as a fan, as a fan of baseball, as a fan of cities, that I could bring something to the table about how one uses the space. It's not just architecture, it's not just what something looks like, it's how something behaves. And buildings kind of never stop evolving, just the way people never stop evolving. So it was a matter of, persuading him that I had something that was different than the other professionals that he had around him. And, I guess I felt too that it takes, communication is always a two-way street. So I felt that I had something to offer, but I think he obviously was listening and looking for that too. Not everyone would have been receptive to it. And so I've really appreciated the opportunities he's given me over the years. You mentioned Fenway Park. He called me 10 years after Camden Yards opened and said, we got this crazy idea to say Fenway. And I'm like, wow, yeah, that's not so crazy to me. Let's do it. And now, of course, I'm working with him again in Worcester on the AAA ballpark that's going to open next month. So it's not an exaggeration to say it's been a sort of a lifelong interview, I guess, a lifelong test.
Yes, I love that. Looking at it that way. Wow. So tell everybody who's not familiar, though, some of the work that you did at Camden Yards. So you got the job, and that Instagram post that you showed, the rejection letter, and then you showed the announcement of your new role, which was an executive level, just a few short months later. So just tell everybody, give them a tease of the type of work that you did for Camden Yards.
Yeah, so my job with the Orioles was to be their representative on the design, and the ballpark was being funded and developed by the Maryland Stadium Authority, and they had hired both the architects, engineers, and also the contractor. But the Orioles had a significant role in shaping the design, both what it would look like and the way it would function. And so I worked really closely with my colleagues at the Orioles to get their input on everything from concessions to marketing to seat mix. And then I used sort of my own skills and Larry's guidance about how to apply an urbanity to it. The thinking about saving the B&O warehouse, and could we make that happen? Could it still fit on the site? How would we take functions that might otherwise be in the ballpark and put them in the warehouse? Larry really wanted very much to have some of the attributes of the older ballparks, the asymmetrical playing field, a scoreboard in the field of play. These were things that he remembered from his years of growing up in Pittsburgh and going to games at Forbes Field. And I really love the opportunity to study these old ballparks and give life to his words of what it could be. And so, it was a fast moving project. I was there about 3 years before Camden Yards opened in 1992. And then as we were moving from being a new ballpark to hosting the All-Star game in 1993, Larry shared me with another baseball club, the Atlanta Braves, whose president was Stan Kasten, and put a pin in that for a minute because it's going to be important to the end of my story. It's not just the beginning, but Stan and Larry shared my time for several years as I was working on Turner Field for Stan in Atlanta, taking the Olympic Stadium and turning it into baseball. And then when Stan, fast forward to 2012, and he became president of the Dodgers, I joined him in Los Angeles to oversee the renovations of Dodger Stadium. But here I am now, however many years later, being shared once again by those same two gentlemen in their respective roles with work at Dodger Stadium and the work at Polar Park.
Wow, it really is like a lifelong interview.
It is. It is. You just never stop kind of looking for new things. And I'm a big believer that importing ideas from other industries is important to sports. I've always tried hard to kind of keep my finger in a world outside of sports, because I think you learn so much about what you can bring to the table when you are tuned into what's going on in other industries and your own observations about how people are using their time doing other things, and how can that apply to sports. So every day is an education for me. I mean, I learned so much from the people around me. I really love my projects, obviously.
And you're so good at them. I'm going to talk about my personal experience with Camden Yards. And you're not going to believe this, but I've actually never watched a baseball game at Camden Yards. But I remember while I was prepping for this interview, I had this flashback. And I remember I was in college visiting a friend, and, we were walking around Baltimore, and we went to Camden Yards, and we just walked by it. And she wasn't a baseball fan either. We were soccer players. And then I grew up a football, basketball fan. So I remember like sticking my head like in the fence and just being like, what is this place? I was like, I feel like I have to come back. Like, it's weird. Like, I'm drawn to this place. Like, it's a full ballpark. And
I
it
love
doesn't feel
that.
like those big stadiums where you see people. It's just, there's something about it. And I loved it before I loved baseball. And I can't believe I haven't seen a game there yet. I cannot wait to watch a baseball game.
It gives you something to look forward to.
It does. It does. And every year I'm like, I'm going to go this year. I'm going to go this year. And so last year I can blame it on, COVID, but years before that I had no excuse. So I definitely want to go for sure.
Well, I love hearing you say that, though, because I do think that's what's so magical about baseball is that you can learn to love the sport if the place feels like it draws you. And I think baseball parks in particular just have a magnetic quality. They don't call them green cathedrals for nothing. They are thought of as places to really take in and savor the summertime, the grass smells, the cheer of the crowd, the popcorn. It's just, there's a lot to love beyond just the sport itself. And I feel like that's part of my job, is to make certain that there's a setting for that to happen.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I wonder if my first baseball game was at Camden Yards, like if that's when I would have fell in love with baseball, because for me, my story is I fell in love with baseball for my first game at Fenway Park, Red Sox, Yankees in the middle of the summer. I remember everything. I remember like how many hot dogs I ate, how funny the vendor was with me, how funny the beer vendor was with me, because I was from New Jersey, or I'm from New Jersey, but like my ID at the time was New Jersey, and they were giving me like, oh, you're a Yankee fan. I'm like, I'm not, I'm just here for fun, I swear. And I remember all the fans that I met. I remember every single thing, even the view from the bleachers, like when I first walked up those stairs. But I don't remember the score of the game. I don't know who won that day. I just remember how much fun I had. And after that, I was hooked. Like I found myself going to wait in line to get obstructed view seats to a different game. You know what I mean? Like to another game. Like I became obsessed.
Right. I do.
From that moment.
I do. Well, listen, it's interesting you said that. The way I found out the Orioles were building a new baseball park in downtown Baltimore was because I was at a game at Memorial Stadium, yip-yapping with fans in the stands. Someone told me they were moving. So yeah, you just never know where an idea might be sparked,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so crazy how it all comes to be. One thing you said, speaking of ideas from other people, if I can get into the weeds here for a second, the one thing I heard you say is you got your job at the Orioles and then you started to meet with everybody and listen to what their ideas were and what they thought the ballpark should look like. That's a key takeaway for, I think, anyone who's listening right now. When they go in to make change, no matter what level you're in, it sounds like to me what you're saying is to be successful, you have to listen and it has to be a collaboration.
Absolutely. Well, it's so important to I think, to everything. And it's important to be effective. Emily Waldhouse, who works with me at the Dodgers, has this amazing devotion to getting to know people in the organization and what they do. And so if you want to get something done, Emily knows who to go to, who can do what. None of this kind of shrugging your shoulders and saying, I don't know how to get this done. She's made it part of her sort of mission to make certain that she not only knows her colleagues, but understands what their responsibilities are so that she can maximize the resources within the organization. And it's just an amazing skill. I've loved watching her work for that reason. Thinking you're a silo or on your own never gets things done the same way as, sort of running in stride with a team.
Yes. And I have to meet Emily. She might need to be on this podcast.
She'd be a great one. Absolutely.
All right, Emily, if you're listening, call me so we can talk. So Orioles, and then talk about your time with, did you say the Atlanta Braves?
Yes, Stan Kasten was president of the Braves and also the Hawks. So we ended up doing the basketball and hockey arena in Atlanta while I was working for Stan too. But Stan had wanted to make certain that even though the city of Atlanta was getting this gift of an Olympic stadium in 1996 and was planning on turning it over to the Braves after the games, that he wanted to make certain that it was a baseball park first, and then while it was still on the drawing boards, modified to accommodate the track and field and the opening and closing ceremonies. So it was a huge challenge to say, well, look, the baseball park wants to be, between 40 and 50,000 seats, and which today seems big, but that was about right for the 90s. And while it's on paper, we're going to turn it into an 80,000 seat Olympic stadium and then shrink back down again 6 months later. But that was the task, was to make Turner Field really work for baseball. And then Stan also had the Phillips Arena, now known as the State Farm Arena, built in Atlanta. And I had a chance to work on that as well. So I had two big projects with Stan. But again, the magic in those was sort of the challenge of a renovation, of fitting into the city, of trying to work around a lot of existing things. And in the case of the Phillips Arena, I really enjoyed the fact that it was right adjacent CNN Center, which everybody likes to say they're 24/7, but CNN Center really is 24/7. And it was great to sort of think about all of our retail, food, and restaurants as serving a bigger population than just the arena.
Hey, Jahaan here. I hope you're enjoying the interview. I'm sure you are thinking about your own career right now and how you can pull out in front of the pack to take your career to the next level. For 18 years, supporting women in sports has been my favorite part of my career, and I would love to support you. Whether it's joining my free Game of Her Own community or one of my one-on-one coaching programs, I am here for you. Send me a message at jblake@jahaanblake.com or DM me on Instagram @jahaanblake, and let's schedule a time to have a free session. I cannot wait to hear from you. All right, let's get back to why you're here. You said something interesting. Larry Lucchino kind of let Stan borrow you, if you will. So were you pulling double duty at this point?
And still am. I've projects often have cycles, and some years it's more intense than others. And in the years that I've worked for the Dodgers, Stan has had us do two ginormous projects, both the $100 million projects in a single off season, and just all consuming. But then we've had years where we've done very modest improvements. And during those years, I've worked with other organizations, and I've helped the Phillies for 2 years on some renovations to Citizens Bank Park. And as it turned into a 20-year-old park, and then this year I'm working with Larry Lucchino on his Polar Park project in Worcester. So it's been nice for me because it's allowed me to have a primary focus with the Dodgers, but to fill my plate during years that we don't have a huge project.
Ooh, I feel like that could be some people's dreams, right? I know it was mine. It was just like, I love going in, working on the fan experience, but I also love it when I don't love maintaining it, right? And it's why I started my own business, because I wanted to be able to go to different organizations and work on multiple projects at once. How did that come to be? Like, did you have to push for that, or was that something that kind of just...
I think the two of them talked about it very early on, and just felt it made a lot of sense because I was wrapping up a project for one organization about the time that the other organization had something start up. And, baseball is competitive on the playing field, but it's very much teams work together on the business side. And I think this was a chance to say, look, let's take what one of us learned and apply it to another venue. And that got to be in the form of me being able to transfer some of those same approaches. And so sometimes you don't know how things are going to work when you look ahead. You can only see how they work when you look back. And this is probably one of those cases where I can only look back and say, how did this work? But I've loved it and, managed to raise 3 kids with at the same time I was doing that. So I have to say that it's been a job that's allowed me flexibility to be a person too. You hope you bring machine-like precision to your work, but you still have a life. So.
Wow. How are you? Okay. So you have 3 children and your home base has always been in Baltimore. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you're working for Orioles, Atlanta Braves, Hawks, the teams in Atlanta. Then you're also doing Fenway Park and now LA. How are you managing that? I know your kids are grown now, but when they were younger, how did you manage all that?
Well, my husband and I we sort of had this rule that there would always be a parent at home. And so he would travel the beginning and end of the week, and I would travel. Typically, I would leave early Tuesday mornings and get home late Thursday nights. And so the 3 days I was in Atlanta or Boston or wherever I might be, I would just literally work, 18 hours a day and get as much done as I could while I was on site, and then work from home on Monday and Friday and through the weekends. But it was reasonable balance for me because it would allow me to always be the carpool mom, the cupcake mom, the go to tennis or baseball or whatever it was on Monday and Fridays. I can kind of count on that and then really just dive into my work the other 3 days a week. And I guess we all have work-life balances, and mine wasn't a work-life daily. It was kind of a work-life weekly. But I think to me, the measure that it worked is if you ask my kids today, and 2 of them have finished college and 1 is still in college. If you ask them today about that, they look at you blankly and say, what? They don't really remember that I wasn't there. They just remember when I was. So is that a litmus test? I don't know. It's all I got.
I love that. So I'm like, no one can see me right now, but I'm smiling. Like, I love that thought. And you made me just honestly think of my parents. And I know my mother and father worked so hard, but I remember all the times they were there. And when they were there, they were present. And, you know what I mean? Like on the soccer field and trying to kick the ball for me, on the sideline. And so I remember all those moments. I don't remember when they weren't. So when I'm thinking about that, though, and I actually want to ask my mother the same question, but you have a very non-traditional, let me back up. For sports, right? You're there, you're in the office typically, right? That's what everyone's doing. You're in the office 9 to 5, longer hours when the team is in town or you're getting ready you're ramping up for something. And it's not normal to see people working from home. And we were forced to do it in 2020, but how did you manage that to say, like, this is how it's got to be for me if I'm going to work for you? Or is that what you said?
Well, I don't think I started out with that. I ended up with that. I think you just start out trying to think, okay, how am I going to make this work? I want the job, but I'm not in a position to move. And so how am I going to make it work? And it worked. Like I said, and a lot of things are easier to explain in hindsight than they are looking forward. And you can't have hard and fast rules. Goodness knows there must have been times when we were wrapping up construction in March that I would have been there all week. And conversely, I presume there were probably some times in December when I could be home all week. So not even sure I remember myself how all of that worked, but you just do make it work. And I think we all learned in 2020 something I've known for a long time, which is that you can do things from home that sometimes are easier done in the absence of activity surrounding you. Some of my think time, sometimes when you're in the office, it's hard to find time just to make phone calls and to read reports and to do tasks that require lengthy, concentrated things. And that was those, I would do those on Monday and Friday. So I, just kind of learned to structure my time so I could have certain things that I could only do when I was there. You can't walk out on a construction site if you aren't there. So that's obviously something I would spend a lot of time doing, is anything that was hands-on there. And then anything that was sort of more desk work, I would say, for when I was home.
Okay. So I hear you learned to structure your time. You were also flexible. Sometimes you had to stay on site all week. It was the nature of the beast and you were okay with that. Is there anything else? Like, what advice would you give women who want to stay in the workforce, but have intense jobs, sort of like, yours, where you're required to be around or you're required to travel? What advice would you give them about approaching it?
Well, I think, I don't know if I have any good advice. I guess the thing to do is to figure out just how do you make it work for you and your family. Whatever infrastructure it is that you have, it doesn't have to be family. I think in some ways the fact that I had, before I had kids, you just had to think, what did I do to make it work for me? Kids sort of force you to think about structure in a way that you don't before, but you have to figure out how to make it work for you. You can't just work all the time because you're no good at work if that's all you're doing. Where would you go find a new idea? Where would you push the refresh button? So I think finding outside things, whatever they are, is important to being effective at work too.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Figuring out what works for you, and then you got to ask for it, right? You have to have those conversations.
Yeah. When we were planning our Centerfield Pavilion project in Los Angeles, I remember one Sunday that I was in the office and someone who was working with me on the project said, well, I'm not coming in on Sunday. I have a friend in town and we're going to go to the beach, go to a fair, go to do something. And I remember saying, don't come in. You'll do me more good if you go out and see how are people spending their leisure time? What makes those beer gardens fun? What makes that food festival worth paying a ticket to go in so you can spend more money buying food? Like that's going to do us more good here at the Dodgers than if you come into the office this afternoon. So, and I really meant that. I think understanding how people use their leisure time and how do they use public spaces and what are they doing when they are off from work teaches us a lot about how we should manage a sports venue and the kinds of things that we should create that make people want to be there, whether or not they're following every pitch or whether or not the team is a lifelong love or just passing weekend piece of fun.
Yes, you need to go live a little in order to bring that back.
Yeah,
to your work.
How did you know? How would you know? How would you know if you weren't out there thinking about those things?
Yes. Take some time for you. And when you do that, I'm guilty of not doing that, especially when it's cold in Chicago and I can go a couple days or so without leaving the house. You know what I mean? Like I have to remind myself, okay, you have to get out there and just your best ideas come when you're not sitting behind your computer.
That's absolutely right.
You've worked on some iconic and just important venues and ballparks. So give everybody just a little sneak peek on what you did at Fenway Park.
Well, Fenway Park in many ways had been a prototype for Oriole Park at Camden Yards. It was a old ballpark. It was clearly baseball. It wasn't a multi-purpose venue. It had a charm that had survived decades and decades, and yet it did not have the kind of support facilities, the seat count, the range of seating types, or the amenities of food, beverage, retail, or even the luxury of space. And so for many years, people were like, well, no, we're going to have to blow it up and build a new one. And I just always was pained by that. And so when Larry Lucchino and John Henry and Tom Warner bought the club in 2002 with a commitment to save it, and Larry called, I was both relieved and ecstatic at the same moment. I'm relieved that Fenway was being given a new lease on life and thrilled that I might have a chance to play a role in that. Of course, we were looking to play baseball there every season. So we had to develop a game plan for the renovations and additions that would allow us to play 9 months. And then between September or October, if we were lucky, and in April of the next year, be able to do our renovations. And so I enjoyed actually the challenge of trying to figure out how to do something with a series of small projects instead of one big change like you would do with a new construction. And I sometimes think the gentler touch is the better, especially with an older building. So both with Fenway Park and with the Dodgers, I've enjoyed trying to map out, okay, well, what are we going to do between October and March that is a meaningful change to the building and gives it a longer life, enhanced revenues, more fan experiences, but we can do a successful construction project during that off season.
Yeah. Now as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, Boston's a tough city. And when you started, I'm really excited to ask this, but when you started, when you got in there, just because of your title and your background, not everyone sees things the way that you do, right? And so how did you go in and sort of gain alignment and get people to understand the value that you were bringing to the table?
Well, I think the city government really played an important part in helping us achieve what we wanted to at Fenway Park. Mayor Menino was, I think, in many respects, relieved himself when the new ownership was committed to Fenway because it had been very controversial trying to find a new place. It wasn't like everyone loved the old Fenway, but they didn't want to give up their neighborhood to build something new. And that had been the idea of construction in a Fenway that would displace businesses wasn't a particularly popular idea. So I think he welcomed this idea and charged the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and in particular, Cairo Shen, who was head of planning for the BRA, to work with us to figure out how can we do things here. Boston has very strict rules, and preservation is a very important part of the lens through which they look at development. So we had to work with local, state, and national preservationists to get approval on our things. And we had property owners adjacent to us on all sides, and we had to work with them. We had a community that was very active, and understanding their needs was very important and very important to the success of the changes. But I think, like Mayor Menino, I think all of those groups were willing to give us a chance because everyone wanted to see Fenway survive. One of our earliest projects was putting up turnstiles on what was then known as Milky Way, Jersey Street, and treating it as an inside the park concourse and getting buy-in from the family that owned the souvenir stores across the street to be essentially our team store and be inside the park. And that was not so much a bricks and mortar project as it was a planning project. How can we reuse the assets we already have? And that ended up being a great success, as did the addition of seats on top of the Green Monster, which were also a project we did very early during the tenure of this ownership. And that too was a litmus test of just how elastic we could be with Fenway. People often think of preservation as being like they're going to polish it up and it's going to look like it did when it was born. But these were very radical changes to the 1912 Fenway, but welcome and received with enthusiasm, both by the neighborhood, by the people who were Red Sox fans, and by the preservation community. Because one of the goals in preservation is not to preserve a building as if it's an object under glass, but to give it a new lease on life so it stays alive.
Yes. So one, I feel like you have such a difficult but rewarding job. Two, it sounds like for when you're working with all these external factors, it goes back to what you were talking about before. It was just really understanding their needs. Right. It all boils back down to that, right?
Yeah. No, you're a team. Wherever you are, you better figure out who your teammates are. Sometimes they're on the same side of the aisle. Sometimes they're on the opposite side, but you want to always be rowing in the same direction. And I think it's a combination of listening to others and synthesizing what's the best way to get things done, and then having a little bit of gold dust that you bring yourself to the job too.
Yes. And speaking of teams, during each of the organizations you're working for, were you leading? Did you have a team underneath you supporting you?
It's always been a really small team. I've always had, two to four people who've been a part of my department. And for the most part, we hire, architects, engineers, graphic designers, construction professionals to execute the projects and be available to us depending on what size project it is. So I sort of have a team in a couple ways. I have a small team internally that manages things with me, and then a bigger team that is plucked from professionals that are tapped based on the size of the project from a bigger external audience.
Do you find it difficult to lead these teams, whether they're vendors or people who are working for you full time? Do you find it difficult to lead them when you're traveling back and forth, when your home base is in Baltimore? And how do you approach that?
Listen, even pre-COVID, you don't meet in person every day on things. You give direction and you give people time to do their magic and bring it back and collaborate on things, but you're not together every day, all day long. So that felt very natural to me.
I love what you just said, giving people time to do their magic. Just let them do their job.
Hovering seldom pays off, so you want to be able to give good direction and have good results and be able to evaluate it, and so that doesn't mean sitting on top of each other all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And I can see how that works. And take us to LA. And since I have you, I want to hear the projects you're working on in LA, and then maybe you can also share what you're working on in Worcester.
Well, Los Angeles has been just a dream. Dodger Stadium is a building that has survived in spite of all odds. At 56,000 seats, it's the largest baseball venue left out there now that all these multi-purpose venues are gone. It's the only building that was sort of born with this mid-century modern, funky Southern California style. And so it almost 60 years old. It's the third oldest in baseball. And it still was just as magical as the day that the ribbon was cut on it, but it was missing many of the things that we would expect to see in a new building today. Mixture of food with good kitchens and the kind of socials, hangout spaces and standing room and milling around room and group areas. And so much of what Stan Kasten has had us do over the 9 years that I've been with the Dodgers is figure out how to change Dodger Stadium without changing Dodger Stadium. Give fans new places to be, new things to do. Look at things like ADA, vertical circulation, exiting, things that had a very different measure of success when the building opened in '62 than they do today. As a result, I hope you would come to Dodger Stadium and say, wow, this is magical. I don't know what they've been doing, because it sits carved into the hillside of Chavez Ravine with these unbelievable views overlooking downtown to the south and the San Gabriel Mountains and Elysian Park to the north, and just unbelievable Southern California landscape with palm trees and firebrush and just beautiful plant material everywhere, and these sort of beautiful plazas with places to eat and kids play areas and exhibits and things that celebrate the Dodgers. And just everywhere you look, it just is seeping with Dodgerese and that Southern California 60s feeling. It's like kind of walking back in time, but it behaves very currently. And so I've loved the way that project has come together. And of course, the team's success over these years has made it even more special because our fans are so excited. And it's fun to have a building that's, can hold 56,000 people and sell out as frequently as the Dodgers do. It's just a real testament to the franchise and the energy level of that franchise. And it's hard not to love that kind of enthusiasm that you find in that fan base.
Well, congratulations on your World Series. That was very exciting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, that was great. That was there were some bittersweet parts to 2020 and then some real celebration to 2020. So that was great to have some of both.
Yes, I love seeing your pictures on Instagram, going to the games. I was like, oh, good. 2020 the ballparks weren't full, but at least, you got to go and experience
it. To go. I know. That was so great because it was, we hosted games at Dodger Stadium, but with no fans. So it was fun to go to Texas and be able to be a fan for, for a week. So I loved it.
Yes. Wait, so tell everybody, how many World Series wins have you been a part of?
Stan Kasten's 1995 Braves World Series and Larry Lucchino's 2004 2007 Red Sox World Series, and then Stan's Dodgers in 2020.
Yes, I was just thinking. I was like, wait a second, that's a that's a big
Yeah,
number.
no, I love that. Yeah, no, it is. I know it's really exciting. If you'd asked me growing up, did I aspire to have a World Series ring? I wouldn't have even thought of it as a goal. But what a great treat, So.
Wow, that's incredible. So do you have 4 or 3 and 1 coming?
3 and 1 coming.
Ooh, that's very exciting. Everyone always asks, like, oh,
I
you have 2
hope.
World
I
Series
gotta
rings.
see.
I was like, Janet Marie Smith has 4. Oh, 3 and maybe 1 coming.
Maybe 1 coming. We'll see. Anyway, it's exciting. It really is. It's the excitement is being part of the franchise when it's on. When, it's just there's nothing like it. There's really nothing like it.
There really isn't. And while the rings are nice and such a touching, right? Like, thank you for, the organization giving it to you. You just feel very special when you receive it. I looked at mine the other day and it just immediately when I see it, it just brings back some incredible memories.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people say to me sort of teasingly, like, oh, that's so great. It must, you must be a good luck charm for the team. But the real digging behind that is that I think when teams are committed to excellence, it's on and off the field. And so, whenever someone hires someone like me, it's because they're looking to make the building as superb as it can be for fans, to make it work for them as a revenue center, to make it work for them as a means of expanding their audience and their reach, as a means of giving players the feeling of being in the most professional of settings. And I think that kind of attitude about the building is also tends to be the organization's attitude about the play. And so they do go hand in hand. And lucky for me, they go hand in hand.
Yes. And your work speaks for itself. And you've worked for owners, presidents, and they know the work that you're doing. And so much so that now you're doing some work on the Worcester Red Sox. Will you mind telling everybody a little bit about that?
So Larry Lucchino, who I mentioned a couple of times now, who I work for with the Orioles and at the Red Sox, is now chairman of the AAA franchise for the Boston Red Sox. And they had been in Pawtucket for many years, and 4 years ago made the decision to move to Worcester, Massachusetts, and to build a new park, Polar Park, in the middle of the Canal District in downtown Worcester. So I've been working on this project for several years, helping Larry and his team. Charles Steinberg is the president, and Charles was with Larry in both Boston and in Baltimore. So it's a little bit like Old Home Week. And we are just thrilled that our architects, DIQ, who did the renovations at Dodger Stadium, have been working on this project for the city of Worcester. And the Canal District is just this very fun, energizing place with lots of restaurants and pubs and just a big personality that feels just right for baseball. So we're really excited about cutting the ribbon on that in April of this year.
Ooh, April of this year. Very exciting.
Just 6 weeks away. Right.
Wow. I'm even more honored that you took some time to sit and talk with all of us and share your story. It's a busy time for you now.
Well, we can't wait I know 2 opening days back to back is more than I've ever done before, but I'm excited about it. So, it would be great. Even better if we can get fans back in 2021 and everyone can come and see for themselves.
Yes. Fingers crossed that things keep moving in the right direction, and people get vaccinated and we start to see more butts and seats, if you will. That would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I'm ready for it. I hadn't gone to a game. I didn't go to a game in 2019, and now I'm kicking myself. So it's going to be hard to get into
you can make up for it.
Yes, I'm going to have to make up for it. It's going to be difficult to go to games this year, but I'm going to make it happen. I have to. I miss it. Okay, are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, 12 questions. Say whatever comes to your mind. They go by really fast. Okay, what is your favorite sports moment?
Wow. No, I can't do that. That would be like picking my children or something. I don't know what to say. Probably my kids' Little League games.
Oh, good answer. Your kids will like that. What is something people always get wrong about you?
Oh, these are hard. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you should tell me that.
We can do a pass. It's okay.
Okay, do a pass on that one.
Pass. Okay. This is easy. What is one food you don't want to give up?
Tamales.
Ooh. Are you a morning or a night person?
Night.
What is your favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving.
What job would you absolutely be horrible at doing?
I would be horrible at making coffee.
Good to know. What product would you seriously stockpile if it was going out of business? They weren't going to sell it anymore.
Hot sauce.
Okay. What is your favorite app?
Starbucks.
Good one. Okay. Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram?
Twitter.
Who is your biggest inspiration in life?
My parents.
As a child, what did you wish to become when you grew up?
I don't know. I think I just wanted to grow up. I don't know if I knew what I wanted to do.
Yes, I completely understand that. I just wanted to be an adult. That's all I wanted to do.
I think I'm still kind of waiting for that moment, but maybe it'll come.
I understand that. Okay, last one. Finish this sentence. The future of women working in sports is...
Well, this isn't finishing the sentence, but I hope that one day we don't have to focus on women working in sports as a thing.
Yes. Yes. No one can see me. I put my hands up in the air. That was I like that one. I completely agree with you. Janet Marie, this has been amazing and a pleasure. Tell me, how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to?
LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm on all of them. And of course, in baseball, you don't hide. So both the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Worcester Red Sox would know how to find me.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And good luck to you. You're just amazing. I love what you're doing. I think it's just so important. And wish you the best.
Thank you very much. So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.